And our next panel is going to be transitioning to an open data future. The man who I learned earlier today is now known as Mr. MasterCard, will be moderating this. Brenton Charnley is an experienced executive with a track record of building new technology businesses from the ground up. Currently, he is the VP and head of open banking at MasterCard Australia, where he leads the product development and growth of open banking. Give a hand to Mr. MasterCard. Great to see you again. Eric Zhang is the co-founder and CEO of Script, a prominent provider of open banking infrastructure known for introducing innovation payment data solutions to the Australian market. I was going to say parket, sounds like a car yard. His passion for open banking and payments, along with his self-proclaimed nerd status in this area, underscores his commitment to driving innovation. With a career in financial services spanning a generation of 25 years, Eric has made significant contributions in the industry from his tenure across brands such as Visa, American Express, NAB and Macquarie. You've got MasterCard to go. Please put your hands together for Eric. Alicia Abaratney is a Senior Manager of Digital Policy at NAB, National Australia Bank. Her focus is on emerging digital policy issues, including the CDR and digital identity. Scott touched on that. I'm hoping too that Australia will get cracking on this front. She's an experienced regulatory lawyer with expertise across privacy, competition and consumer protection law. Alicia, please come up. And finally, Natalia Yevlevskaya is the Research Fellow at UNSW Sydney, Faculty of Law and Justice, and an Associate Fellow of the Higher Education Academy in the UK. Her role as a Research Fellow at the Australian Research Council Laureate Project, The Financial Data Revolution, Seizing Benefits, Controlling the Risks. Wow, what a paper to be working on. She looks at how data and technology are transforming financial services in Australia and abroad. What measures may be required in the areas of data and technology governance to facilitate innovation in finance. Go wild, team, come on, welcome to the stage. Over to you, Mr. MasterCard.
Thank you, Simon. It's definitely a new title, so whoever came up with that one yesterday, thank you very much for Mr. MasterCard. I've got a very easy task. I've got some great specialists to talk about today, but we're well on our way for our transition. We heard from the Minister this morning. You know, I talked about in the last event we had at CDR month that it feels kind of like we've been in dog years terms. So it's kind of like the 21st birthday of CDR, you know, the 3 years, 7 years in dog years. It's our 21st birthday. We're definitely on our transition, but we're here in open banking. We've had non-bank lending consultation announced. We've got open energy. So let's talk a bit more about open data and kind of where we're going. So Eric, first, let's talk about the nirvana of an open data economy. What's your perspective?
Well, that's a big one. I'll boil it down to 3 key themes: interoperability, competition, and infrastructure. So there's probably 2 parts to interoperability. First is really just all the ecosystems coming to terms and acknowledging that they need to be interoperable, right? So, you know, there is still a bit of a notion in the market that people want to connect directly into the CDR, build their own solutions and deliver a solution to the end consumer or the end business, right? You think about how the world works these days, it's very interconnected. Like, you don't have Toyota going out and saying, I need to build my own machinery. You don't have tech companies going out and building every single bit of their own code. There's such a thing as an open source library these days. So acknowledgement of that to a broader scale is going to be incredibly important. The second part of interoperability is that CDR is something new. There's a lot of new standards being actually brought out. I think, you know, the ability to talk to existing systems, existing processes, that's going to be really important. A very good example of that is when we go down the path of developing payment initiation, if the CDR comes and actually develop their own standard in terms of what that payment instruction is going to look like, that's going to be problematic, right? Because the banks will need to interpret that and translate that back into existing payment standards. But if they're actually developing it and say, okay, let's just develop to existing BEX or MPP standards and have the data fields in exactly the same way as it's been ingested, then it makes things a lot easier. So I think we need to take that into consideration. Same thing goes to things like, you know, account opening, account closing, all that sort of jazz. How does it actually work within the banks, and how do we consider that as part of the legislation that actually rolls out? Co-opetition, we've spoken to death about this. I'm not the first or the last one to actually say this. Every session that I've been to, I think there's a bit of consensus that we need to talk more, right? That does not mean talking to the ACCC only, right? It means us participants need to talk to each other. Why? Because 80% of our problems are actually common, right? So having a common voice is very important. I mean, a good example of that is we're now building, or have built, a really good relationship with a number of the major banks, including NAB, where we've got a good relationship and said, okay, let's proactively work together to solve issues relating to CDR for our mutual customers. That's beautiful. That's really, really good. And I think we need more people to come to the table for that. And lastly, infrastructure. I think if the UK is anything to go by, 80% of the capabilities delivered in the UK in terms of open banking is from 20% of the players who are infrastructure providers, right? So we're not talking about necessarily solutions that it's all-encompassing, you deliver a solution to the market, but actually tools that people can actually use, right? So, you know, my analogy is, if you think of CDR as electricity, who are the ones out there providing the light bulbs and all the electrical appliances that people can take into their own house and actually use that? That's going to be incredibly important. We're an infrastructure provider, but I don't think there's enough. We need more infrastructure providers. Yes, I did say that. We need more competition.
It's a good point, and I mean, comparatively to where we are in the UK, there's hundreds of, you know, AISPs and equivalent and PISPs, right? Because the regulation standards enable that. But we've obviously taken a different interpretation of that in Australia for good reason in the privacy direction. So perhaps it's a good opportunity to pass to Alicia. Do you want to talk about that balance between those two things, the principles, the risk and the privacy, and how that plays out in the CDR and our transition?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brenton. And thanks to FinTech Australia. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel and with such esteemed company here today. So I guess at the outset, before I delve into that question, I think it's really important to recognise that open data means different things to different people. So for some people, when they hear the term open data, it can have this connotation of a lack of privacy and a lack of security, and it might engender these feelings of extractive practices where, you know, companies take your data and use it and there's no value that's accrued to end users. And I think it's really, and you know, hearing Scott Farrell's words, it's incumbent on all of us, right, to displace that narrative, because I don't think that's what the CDR is about. So when I hear open data, you know, I think about a world where users have control over their data and that ability to direct it to different companies for their own benefit. And I would contrast that really to a vision of a future world where there are one or two large players that profit and use information without any value accruing to citizens or to the Australian economy. So all that being said, in my view, I think the CDR does a really good job in balancing privacy and competition. So I'm a privacy lawyer by trade, and I sort of look at the CDR and I think there are a number of strong protections in the CDR already that really enhance privacy. So we have those privacy safeguards and the CDR rules, which really put strict protections on how we handle CDR data, what can be used and how it's meant to be held. And we've heard these are stronger than our Federal Privacy Act. We have secure data sharing through APIs, and something which I think is very unique is we have hard-coded in the legislation a principle of data minimisation. So that flows through from collection and use. So this is a great foundation for us to build on. I think when you look at the competition side and the innovation side, in that regard, I think there is some scope for reform around how we could sort of better tweak the statutory settings to allow for more innovation, whether it be around that CDR-derived data boundary, the ability to use identifiable data and ask consumers for consent to use it to innovate. Because as we all know, and we've heard from the Minister today, unless we build products and services, the CDR has no use. So I'd love to see more movement there, but I think we really have a strong foundation, and I'd love for us all to build on that.
Thanks, Alicia. We're going to go to you, Natalia, on this one. One of the key themes that's missing in Australia that we've talked about and been talked about a long time is the pending rules on action initiation and in turn payment initiation. It was one of the big drivers for a large volume of uptick in usage in the UK. Natalia, do you want to talk about why that's a key ingredient for our transition to an open data economy?
Sure, and I'm happy to do that. And I think we'll be talking a lot analogies potentially in this session. We talked previously about electricity and light bulbs. I think when I think about action initiation, I think of customer data being a source of energy, and action initiation is that engine. And together, they will drive any open data system. And it is, in my opinion, the most important ingredient, because without action initiation, consumer data right is essentially nothing but a comparison website in most of the cases. So, but step by step, in a nutshell, as you would know, action initiation, or right access as we call it, is the ability for consumers to allow service providers to initiate actions on their behalf. Compared to what we currently have under CDR, which is read access, businesses or service providers can access data, analyze data, and suggest product or services to consumers, or suggest actions to consumers. Now, with action initiation takes one but a significant step further. It makes payments for consumers possible on behalf of consumers. It will do a lot of things, and the limit is only imagination. The simplest school book examples probably would be it will make possible for consumers, for businesses to apply on behalf of consumers for new products, be it credit cards or home loans. It will enable them to move funds between different accounts to maximize the profits, and so on and so forth. So the breadth of use cases enabled by action initiation will, of course, heavily depend on how the open data economy is structured, particularly which economy sectors have this functionality enabled. But the opportunities are, as I mentioned before, limitless, and so are the benefits for businesses in the first place. It's an opportunity to significantly diversify their portfolios and enhance their range of their products and services. But for consumers, of course, it's enhanced convenience, it's seamless experience in most of the cases, and it's, of course, also greater choice of the products on the market. But there is also one, what I think is underappreciated benefit from the perspective of consumers, and this is what we would call action initiation promises to drive out loyalty penalties and restore commercial morality, if you wish. As you would know, we tend to overpay for many of the products and services we receive. And for example, energy and telecommunications will be the best example. We do pay more for our mobile phone plans, and we do also pay much more than we needed for our energy bills, but because we're so busy, we just don't have the time to compare and find the best thing for us. So action initiation enables the service provider to come to me, not only with a suggestion to do that, because this is exactly what we don't do. We don't take unsolicited phone calls because we don't have the time to act on those phone calls and suggestions. But the service provider with the action initiation functionality will do most of the work for me. So switching between product and services becomes a seamless experience, and forces service providers to treat all customers fairly upfront. For example, until 1995, there was a legal provision in the Trade Services Act prohibiting price discrimination, but nowadays the reality is different. We all pay more, and for example, consumers with a home loan that was taken out for long ago tend to pay much more in comparison to consumers that entered into their home loans more recently. So we can see from this that the opportunities are many, benefits are many. Of course, there are certain risks to that too, and we can speak about that later. But I think I'll leave it there at the moment so that I won't monopolise the panel.
Thanks, Natalia. We've got a follow-on question. This one's unprompted by Eric, but I think you can handle this one because you are payments and data agnostic, if I call it that. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about Pay2 coming into the market, action initiation, and I know you've been participating in this. We're talking about our transition away from old infrastructure to new infrastructure, right? Like, how do you see action initiation and Pay2, the other payments components in that transition? Where do you think we're at in that process? Can we do action initiation or payment initiation with our existing standards, as an example?
Absolutely. Now that you got me started. I think the misconception in the market is that payment initiation is an actual payment method. It's not, right? I think one thing we need to get very clear, payment initiation is simply an instruction layer, right? We're passing a message from the customer through the CDR network back into the banks, and they're the ones making the payment. It does not compete with NPP. It is complementary to NPP. It could be a feed into an NPP transaction. It could be a feed into a BEX transaction. It could be a feed into an international transaction or whatever else transaction that the banks decide to take. I think that's a fundamental difference that we need to understand. In fact, for the banks, it may seem like a competing product, but it's not, because all it does is it feeds instructions back into the bank. So guess who gets the transactions? The banks, right? The banks get the transactions. Remember that, right? So we're not feeding it anywhere else. Visa, close your ears, and MasterCard too. So I think we need to understand that the interoperability of payment initiation with existing payment methods is absolutely fundamental, and it's at the very core of what payment initiation is intended to be.
Very helpful. I thought I'd go to maybe a question to the audience. This is about a group participation one. So it's called the Consumer Data Right. Now, if you're uncomfortable putting your hands up, obviously don't do that. But who has actually done a consent under the Consumer Data Right with their bank? Now, maybe that's a really good turnout, by the way. Maybe we're a little bit biased given we're in the FinTech sector and, we're all a bit nerdy about payments and we can talk CDR and you know what we're talking about. But I think that's a pretty good representation, right? But I think overall, when we heard that from Minister Jones this morning, is all about participation, use cases, and the intention for people like we have on the panel to make that happen. I guess one of the things we saw recently as part of the statutory review, Alicia, if you could talk to this one first, was the pausing of the expansion of CDR, right? The promise of the broader open data rather than just open banking and open finance. Do you want to talk about that? Why do you think that happened? And what do you see as the implications of that happening for particularly the banking sector?
Sure, thanks, Brenton. So I think when the government announced that they were going to do that, they focused on the fact that we wanted to bed down the CDR in banking and energy before we scale up and scale out. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You want to sort of make sure everything's working well until you then move forward. I guess I would say, a cornerstone of our consumer data right is that it is a whole of economy right, and it's a bold ambition, but I think it's a great ambition, and I would love to see the rollout continue in future. We actually co-authored a paper with NatWest in the UK, and one of the findings of our report was that this breadth of our consumer data right is something that globally a lot of markets are looking to follow with smart data and other initiatives. So I think it would be great if we could sort of cash in on that vision in due time. And another factor I think is, there's a really strong consumer imperative to have a whole of economy regime. Our privacy regulator, the OAIC, recently put out its annual survey on community attitudes towards privacy. It's a great longitudinal survey. It's done every year. And one of the findings was that 84% of participants wanted more choice and control over what their data is collected and used for. And just echoing my previous comments, I think this regime really does provide that choice and control. So I think it will be good to see that being used as the pipes for the whole of economy to be able to share data in the future.
I mean, it's a really interesting perspective, and having worked across the UK and Australia, it's always you want what you don't have, right? We're looking at the UK saying, look how amazing that is, and they're looking at us saying, oh, you've started with open finance. We wish we had that regulatory regime that around consumer data, right, rather than just open banking standards. I guess to you, Natalia, on this point with the statutory review, it really came out talking about how world-leading the CDR is. Like, do you think if we don't get on with it, there's a risk of us losing that mantle to perhaps, you know, we've seen CDR, and we had Scott Farrell just here talking about his work that he's doing across multiple markets. And, you know, is there a risk that if we don't execute on this, New Zealand might beat the Aussies again at something, or vice versa, another country like Brazil or the UK, where their latest iterations in PSD3 might change? What do you think?
Right. Well, I think there is a risk, but I hope it won't materialize. So indeed, Australia is world leading in the sense that it's the only economy at the moment where data sharing is enabled and was designed from the inception to be shared across economy sectors. And we've got 4 areas at the moment designated: well, banking, energy, telecommunications, even though at the moment it's a little bit on hold. We have the non-bank lending here. So we know that, well, look, data sharing started in the banking, and European Union, PSD2, UK are the cradle of that open banking area. We have now, though, New Zealand partners, as you mentioned. The legislation is drafted, the consultative process closed, the Consumer and Product Data Bill are there and probably will be out with us quite soon next year. The same initiative, Smart Data Initiative in the UK, is going in the same directive slowly but probably steadily. So there are other jurisdictions with a lot of very good manpower to advance the systems. However, if you think about the European Union, probably if you think about such massive regulatory behemoths as the United States, you can see that probably that groundbreaking idea of such a kind is probably easier to implement in a smaller to mid-sized economy as Australia is. So we have certain competitive advantages there, and we will be following that quite closely in the years to come, but I want to hope that we'll stay ahead of the world.
I mean, let's hope we do beat New Zealand or other markets to this, because I think we are world leading, and, you know, use cases. We've certainly heard that loud and clear, and I agree we need more participation to be happening right now. So we're going to wrap things up because we're well over time. The next session is going to come in, but I want to ask one last question of the panel for each of you. What is your wish for the CDR and our transition to open data? What would you love to see? It's the 21st birthday, you're giving a wish to the CDR, you're saying, congratulations, we won't talk about all the drunken stories you had in the previous 21 years, but what's the future wish?
Probably using your own words, Brenton, as keep seeing use cases popping up, and Australia maintaining the current leadership we have.
Yeah, thank you. I'd say yes, to have a whole of economy data sharing regime, and also echo Scott's words around embedding a role for digital identity as we move broader and deeper for the regime.
I wish for mass adoption of CDR. Right, sounds motherhoody, but I think it's easier said than done. Because right now, I think I suppose the challenging situation is that a lot of the adoption is actually from startups and fintechs, right? So they've got brand new cool solutions they're launching to market, and they're adopting CDR. So what we're seeing is new solutions, really cool solutions that a lot of people haven't seen before, coupled with data sources that your everyday Australian's not familiar with, right? We're not going to drive adoption. We're not going to drive mass adoption of that. So what really needs to happen are the big players in the market need to come to the table. That includes the banks themselves utilising CDR data, as well as a lot of the established players who are already using bank data in some shape or form. So guys, let's flip those data sources over. They're already using bank data. Let's make it happen. Very good. Just as we wrap up, shameless plug for this afternoon.
4:30, we're doing a CDR masterclass deep dive. So if you do want to get more into the topic, I'll be hosting another panel with FinTech Australia this afternoon at 4:30. But please join me in thanking our panel.